Okay, so we are moving on now into our next Egyptian story. It's a very great one called The Journey of Weniman. It's also variously translated as The Report of Wenamun because it is very likely, this is told in the first person, kind of like one of their autobiographical tomb inscriptions, but it is very likely that this is a real factual account, as amazing as it is, of a voyage that took place from Egypt along the Syrian coast there, through the Phoenicians, the whole world of the Phoenicians, and the Sea Peoples. So this text dates from about 1100 BC, right in there, and some terrible things have happened to Egypt by this point. Anyone who doubts Spengler's model that civilizations rise and decline inevitably, anyone who doubts that is not acquainted with the historical facts here. Because by this point, Egypt is a memory. It is dead, done, and gone. And what has happened to it is a number of blows, the first of which was the Hicksos Invasion, which took place around 1675 BC. They come in, Semites, they come raiding out of the deserts of Palestine, introducing for the first time to the Egyptians this new battle machine, which would be the equivalent of like the British introducing the tank on the battlefields of World War I. A whole new game changer with the two-wheeled chariot and the compound bow. They come in and they take over the north of Egypt, but only the north. And so for the first time since it's the two intermediate periods, but basically it's been unified ever since Narmer in 2900 pulled the two lands, the balance, Upper Egypt in the south, Lower Egypt in the north together. Here they separate again, and the Hyksos set up a capital at Avaris, which later becomes Tanis. It's the same place, which you'll recall from Raiders of the Lost Ark, of course. And so they set up a rulership there. We see the first appearance of one of the Hebrew names, Jacob El, who's one of the rulers. And they take on the gods, the negative gods of the Egyptians, Set and the Apophis serpent. They actually elevate those to their primary gods, interestingly enough. So we get a couple of rulers named Apophis, Apophis I and Apophis II. This goes on for a century. And then in the south at Thebes, we get a number of pharaohs there. So we have a schism, a break there, where we have a Hyksos ruler in the delta in the north and a Theban ruler in the south. So that happens. And then the brothers Amoza and Kamoza come along and kick them out, expel them. And at that point, the Egyptians build their first universal state. They become imperialists. They conquer all of Palestine, as we have seen, all the way up to the Hittites, whom they could not get past. And so that became a sort of boundary zone for them. But now there's this new multi-ethnic, cosmopolitan, very late-stage Spenglerian empire that is up and running. And so we go through a number of these rulers. Thutmose III is generally regarded as the greatest of them. He was the great conqueror of Palestine. And then we cycle down to the next blow, which is Akhenaten. So Akhenaten comes in about 1350 BC, right in there. Rejects the Theban priesthood, sets up his own capital, creates his own city, Amarna, and anathematizes all the funerary gods, which is crazy because funerary gods is what Egypt is. That's its whole raison d'etre. Funerary cults. You can't do that. It would completely destroy the Egyptian cultural immune system, which it does. It takes 13 years, and a plague hits Amarna, wipes everyone out, and the Akhenaten has dealt it a very severe blow. The first blow was from the external proletariat that has come in, the Hyksos, impacting Egypt. And the other terrible, even further terrible, more terrible, is an internal proletariat. Akhenaten represents now an internal proletariat that comes in and attempts to overthrow Egyptian mortuary cults. It's like a civilizational autoimmune disorder. That's exactly what it is. Civilization, Spengler here again was correct, can be looked at as living organisms. They have diseases as well. They're invaded by viruses as well. They have immune systems as well. Spengler's model applies all the way down the board here. He was absolutely correct. And so that's the next blow. Then the next blow, which is another external proletariat, comes between 1200 BC and 1100 BC. And poor Ramses III gets stuck with this right around 1180 to 1150, somewhere right in there. After the Titan, Ramses II, who lived for like 90 years, and fucked every woman on the planet, had a huge profusion of children. That was Egypt's sunset effect right there with Ramses II, where he goes around having huge monuments built everywhere, just one gigantic monument after the next. And that corresponds morphologically to Spengler's stage of the Roman imperial period, where they're creating gigantic, the Colosseum, gigantic forums, Thermae, all this stuff, the phase of gigantism, which we're in now in our civilization. At the tail end of it, it goes through a phase of gigantism, which started for us in the 1930s with all the great, the Empire State Building and the LA Aqueduct and Hoover Dam. All this gigantism and colossalism in our architecture corresponds to the phase of Ramses, which then corresponds to the phase of the Roman creation of the Colosseum and so forth. So these are morphologically exact parallels. They are precise. There is an order to history. Don't let some asshole historian tell you that there isn't, that this is just, oh, it's just fanciful German thinking. No, it isn't. It's correct. It's correct thinking. So then what happens is, so now the Sea Peoples. And so the Sea Peoples, scholars are not sure where they came from, but I would place a bet on it that they came out of the Black Sea as a result of the Trojan War, which destabilized the whole region. So the Trojan War comes in 1200 BC. Most scholars agree that that is correct, that it is 1200 BC, but that's also the same time as the Exodus. Most scholars also agree that it takes place under Ramses II, 1200 BC. So these catastrophic events are taking place. Egypt with the Exodus and all these Hebrews leaving and deciding to be an internal proletariat no longer, and they exile themselves to become an external proletariat and plant the seeds of a whole new civilization. The Magian, what Spengler calls the Judeo-Christian Islamic. Meanwhile, the Trojan War has been fought over access to the Black Sea. And it cannot be an accident then that right after that, we get the Sea Peoples coming in out of that region. And the Sea Peoples were equivalent to the Vikings. And Toynbee calls this a Völkerwanderung, which ushers in a dark age. And so from 1200 to about 1000 or so, or even 900, there is an Eastern Mediterranean dark age because of the Sea Peoples. Everywhere they went, they destroyed, pillaged, burned, and the Hittites, whom the Egyptians could not defeat, are laid waste. They are simply wiped out, as though they had never been. They had been around for 5 centuries, and they were Indo-Aryans who had appropriated Mesopotamian culture, and they were so tough, even the Egyptians couldn't beat them. The Sea Peoples wiped them out, as though they did not exist. The Mycenaeans are wiped out everywhere along the coast of Palestine. The Canaanites, the city of Ugarit, everything is wiped out, destroyed, pillaged, burned. The only thing that survives, the only culture that survives is Egypt, and just barely, but in a totally degenerate state. They survive the waves of the Sea Peoples that just keep hammering them like human tsunamis that just keep coming in. So how they deal with it is they give them, their empire has been so weakened by Akhenaten's lack of interest in it. The turning point with the Egyptian empire in Palestine was Akhenaten because he didn't care about it. War to him was an evil. He wasn't interested in it, so he let it go. And ever since then, Palestine has been a shambles. And so when the Sea Peoples get there, it's relatively easy for them to destroy the Egyptian empire, which they pretty much do. And they come to basically a settlement with Ramses III, who says, all right, you guys just take Palestine. We don't need it. It's not Egypt. You can have it. So they do. One of their tribes Palestine is named after them, the Peliset. And also a tribe we'll be dealing with here in this story, the Jakar, who later become the Sicilians, who migrate somehow to Sicily and become the Sicels, or the Sicilians. And a whole bunch of other peoples come out of these Sea Peoples. So it's a complete disaster. And all these cultures are destroyed over the course of these 2 centuries, and this puts an end to the Bronze Age, or let's say the first generation of high civilization, Mesopotamia and Egypt. Mesopotamia survives this relatively unfazed. For some reason, they managed to survive. It doesn't affect them much, even though they're already in decline, in a thorough decline. And the Egyptians survive, but they're very badly damaged. And now comes down to the timeline of the story, Ramses XI, who is a very weak ruler, who was the last to rule for a while over the 2 lands as a single pharaoh. and after him, it disintegrates back into two lands again. And so as this story opens up, we have two rulers now, two pharaohs. Herihor, who is a ruler in the south at Thebes, and Herihor was the first priest. He was a priest of the cult of Amun to become a pharaoh. So he starts as the chief priest of the cult of Amun, and then he rises to become the pharaoh of the south. And the pharaoh in the north is a man named Smendes, who rules, though, with his wife, Tanit Amun. They're always mentioned as a pair, so she must have been a very powerful woman, and probably scholars guess that she was one of the Ramessides. She's probably descended from Ramses, which is probably why she was so powerful. So that's the situation, is the breaking of the balance now back into the two lands. And Egypt is pretty much a memory by this point. They've lost their empire, they've lost their power, they've lost their cultural creativity. They're in full tilt Spenglerian thermodynamic equilibrium. It's over for them. And this story reflects that. And what we'll see in this story is that it provides us with a very unique window, because Egypt is the only culture that still has writing. They're the only ones. Out of all this disintegration and chaos, even the Mycenaeans who had writing lose it. So the Greeks lose it for a time. So you get a 2 centuries long dark age in Greece until Homer shows up in 750. That's even 3 or 4 centuries. So it's a while before the Greeks recover writing, but the Egyptians have it. And they have provided us here with a window into a dark age, so we can actually see what it's like. And so what we'll see here is that the Jikar that Wenamun encounters on his voyage are a tribe of the Sea Peoples, and they're still fighting that war. All the bad luck that Wenamun has on this voyage has to do with the fallout from the wars between Ramses III and the Sea Peoples. They're still fighting it, and poor Wenamun sort of has to bear the brunt of it. And also there's a slightly comical side. Wenamun has so much bad luck that it's almost unbelievable. And I think he is literature's first Schlemiel, the first official Schlemiel in the history of literature. This guy has no luck whatsoever. So it probably is a true story, given that. That tends to be how stuff happens in the world. This is not a hero myth at all in any way, shape, or form. So as it starts out then, Herihor now has sent Wenamun on a voyage to go to the cedars of Lebanon to get wood there so that they can build a new barge for Amun. The great god of Thebes is Amun, the hidden one, the invisible one. That's the god that Akhenaten tried to wipe out of existence, but it didn't work. And so he goes to Tanis, to Smendes and Tanit Amun, and he gives to them, foolishly, he gives to them his rescript papers, which are his credentials. It's like trying to, handing over your passport to someone and then trying to travel out of country with it. It was a complete mistake right from the start. So they look at his rescript papers and they say, that's fine, if Thebes wants to do this, we will encourage the voyage, go right ahead. And so he has a crew on board this ship who are not Egyptians, they are Syrians. So we've gotten a lot of racial, multi-ethnic intermixing now going on. But this proves to be a problem, the Syrians on board his boat. So he sets out, and the first city into the Mediterranean that he encounters along the coast is a city named Dor, D-O-R, and it was a place that was created by the Jikar, one of the Sea Peoples, and so it's all Sea Peoples. And so the prince of that city is a man named Bader, and he's one of these Sea Peoples, but now they have a place. They have land, they have a city, so for now they're happy. But what happens is he pulls into the harbor, and the guy greets him warmly and gives him wine and beef. But meanwhile, during that night, someone on board his ship makes off with all the money. All the gold and all the silver, and it's a shitload that has been loaded on there to trade with Byblos to get the cedars, is now gone. So he's been robbed in the port here at Dor, and he's furious. So he goes to the prince, and he says, look, this is your harbor. You're in charge of this. So I want my goods back. They don't belong to me. They belong to the god Amun, and they belong to the pharaohs Herihor and Smendes. And they will belong to the prince of Byblos if that money we have to give him. So you need to get it back. And the guy's like, well, I don't know what you're talking about. He scratches his head up. Well, I mean, okay, we'll look around. I mean, if it had been a thief on my land, but it's a thief out of your ship, so we're not really responsible, but we'll look around. So note already from the get-go the disrespect now that is being shown to the Egyptians. They no longer are held in the esteem that they once were when they ruled this place. There's huge disrespect from all these low-rent princes that he encounters. And so he looks around. Of course, he can't find anything. He waits 9 days, and he's got to go to Tyre now, the Phoenicians, the realm. And he says, all right, I'm leaving, but if you find that money, keep it, and then I'll swing by on my way back and pick it up. So in the meantime, I don't know how he thinks he's going to buy the cedar, but he proceeds with the voyage. So he goes to Tyre, and there's a brief episode there. I think there's some lacunae in the text where there's information missing here and there. There's a very short period where he's in Tyre and he talks to the person there. These are Phoenicians now. The two main cities of the Phoenicians are Tyre and Sidon, and they are major traders of cedar wood on the one hand and the purple dye that they manufactured on the other, which is used for royalty. Later they found Carthage in North Africa, and that karma will devolve to the Romans, who have to fight them during the Punic Wars. But in the meantime here, so we have Wenamun in Tyre, and he tells him what happened at Dor, and the guy says, leave, because he's friends with that guy. So the Sea Peoples have really infiltrated Palestine, and none of them are sympathetic to the Egyptians. So he leaves, and then he goes up to Byblos, and as he pulls into the harbor there, he realizes that there are Jukar crew members on board his ship. I don't know why it dawns on him now, but it does. And he has them searched, and they have a little bit of silver, like 30 debens of silver, which he appropriates from them. It's nothing compared to what he's lost, which is well over 100 debens of gold and silver. But he appropriates it from them, and he says, I'm taking this, and I'm holding it until you people find out who took my money, who took Amun's money. So he pulls in to the harbor there, and he gets out of the ship, and he sets up a tent for this statue that he has brought. It's probably a wooden statue, otherwise he wouldn't be able to move it around, of the god Amun, who's known as Amun of the Road. It's an avatar of Amun, Amun of the Road, to protect the voyage. So he's brought a god with him as far as he is concerned, and he sets up a tent to hide it and cover it, and he camps out on the beach. But the Prince of Byblos tells him, depart my harbor. And the text doesn't say why he's hostile to him, but it is implied that the Prince of Byblos, Zikar Baal, who is this narrative's primary antagonist, probably has heard about the appropriation of the silver from the Jukar. In some translations, his name is actually Jukar Baal. Some translations, it's Zikar Baal. So he might be related to the Jukar. If he has that prefix in his name, he probably is, and he's sympathetic with them, even though he's a Phoenician. So he keeps telling him to depart over 29 days, and the guy's camped out on the beach there over 29 days. And then finally what happens is that one of his men, one of his page boys, is suddenly seized, as the Israelite prophets are, by a god. And it is obviously the god Amun, who has seized possession of his consciousness and tells the Prince of Byblos, let Amun be seen. Bring Amun up here and let him be seen. This is his envoy. Treat him accordingly. So meanwhile, apparently over the course of this month, and this is another lacuna in the story, his ship disappears in the harbor. I don't know whether it's been stolen or what has happened, but for some reason he no longer has a ship. And so he's been trying to find a ship to get back to Egypt. And then on this night that the guy is seized by possession, he does indeed find a ship that's headed back to Egypt. He loads up all his stuff on it that he fortunately took out of his boat and put on the beach. So he loads it up, and he's going to depart the following morning. When the guy who's been coming out every day to tell him to leave comes out and says, oh, the prince says don't leave. Wait till tomorrow. He says, well, you've been coming out telling me to leave every day here. Well, I mean, and now what, the boat, you're going to tell me to stay here when the boat leaves? And so they send a message to the captain of the boat, stay till tomorrow. The prince needs to have an audience with Wenamun. And so the morning dawns, and he goes into the castle of the Prince of Byblos, which overlooks the sea. A very cushy situation he has for himself here, and his attitude toward Wenamun is total arrogance, total surliness. He's completely rude. But it highlights the attitude now that these peoples in Palestine have toward the Egyptians. They no longer get the respect that they once did. Their moment has passed. So he goes up, meets him. He says, may Amun favor you. He's very polite. The guy gets right to the point, he bypasses pleasantries, and he goes, and he goes, so how long has it been since you left Thebes to get to here? And Wenamun says, 5 months. It's been a total of 5 months. And he says, what happened to your ship? And where are your papers? I need to see your rescript papers. And he says, well, I gave those to Smendes and Tentamun. And he says, oh, really? So what is this that you're doing here? I mean, there are, what's going on here? There are 20 ships in my harbor. There must be like 20 ships in my harbor that could take you back to Egypt. There are ships in Sidon that could also take you back to Egypt. What are you doing here? And he says, well, I'm here on behalf of the god Amun, and I'm here to get cedar wood from your forest to build a barge for him, just as your fathers have done, and their fathers, and so on. We have always had this agreement with Byblos to trade merchandise for cedars. And he says, yes, that is true, and I'm willing to do that. The thing is, though, that you have nothing to bargain with. You don't have a ship. You don't have anything. You don't have any money. I mean, my fathers were given 6 ships, and I have the ledger right here, and he pulls out the papyrus roll and unrolls it, where they came in with 6 ships loaded with merchandise to get these cedars. You come here with 1, and it's not even accounted for now. So what do you have? And he says, I have the god Amun. He's got the statue of Amun that he's preserved on the beach with him, and he says, I have the god Amun. That should be guarantee enough for this deal. You should give these cedars gratuitously. But he doesn't want to do it. He says, no, you need to have some kind of payment here. So he says, all right, give me one of my scribes and let me write back. Let's send him back to Egypt, to Smendes, and see what I can get brought up. So they do that, and a month passes by or so, and the ship returns, and it has some goods on it, but it's nothing like what he started out with that he lost, and it's nothing like his ancestors used to do with 6 ships of merchandise, but it's a few things, and it's enough to soften the Prince of Byblos, Sakarbal. He says, all right, well then, so he hires 300 men to go out and start chopping down the cedars, chops them down, and they lie there through the winter, and then when the spring comes, then he summons Wenamun, and he says, all right, and he's rude to him one final time, can't resist another slap in the face. So he's standing there and he says, okay, see down on the beach there's all your cedars, take it and go. Those cedars are there, and I don't care whether the weather is bad or what the situation is, get the fuck out. Yes, you gave me payment, but it isn't anything like the payment that I am used to receiving. Now this is, of course, this story, as always with Egyptian tales, they lie underneath the Bible stories. This is the story in 1 Kings 5 of Solomon dealing again with Tyre, the king of Tyre, who is named Hiram, to get cedars from him to build the first temple in Jerusalem, to build the first temple. And so they send food. They don't send gold and silver. They send food, wheat, barley, and emmer to the king of Tyre, who at first is happy with the transaction and gives him the cedars. But then later, after the temple is built, they don't have any money to give to Hiram at that point, so they make him king over 20 cities. But for some reason, he's dissatisfied with this. He's not happy about it. So clearly, this story has been echoed in the Old Testament, in that tale. And so the guy's standing there saying, all right, yeah, I've done the payment just like my forefathers have done, but you have not done what your forefathers have done in bringing lots of merchandise, so get out. And you're lucky that what happened to Kamwezet when he came here did not happen to you. Kamwezet had come under Ramses the 11th and had languished there and died basically over the course of 17 years in a similar situation. He's like, you're lucky this didn't happen to you. And Wenamun says, well, but Kamwezet was just a human. He didn't have a god with him. I brought a god. So what happened with Kamwezet, it's not the same situation as with me. And he says, you would do well to carve for yourself a stela for your tomb that says, I did this deed on behalf of Amun, and that I deserve praise and beneficence for it, because when somebody comes back here from Egypt, as they inevitably will, you will be looked on with praise rather than blame. And he just kind of shrugs his shoulders and says, fuck off. So he goes down to the beach to load the logs onto his boat. Now he sees coming into the harbor 11 ships of the Jakar, who are pissed off and want their money back. He has appropriated silver from them, although they stole it from him first, but this is still fallout from the war between the Egyptians and the Sea Peoples. And now he's, poor guy. I mean, like I say, literature's first schlemiel ever. Just nothing but bad luck. And so he collapses sort of on the beach and he starts crying. And the prince's envoy comes out to him and says, what's going on? What's the matter? And he says, well, look, I'm never going to get out of here. These guys want to put me in jail. They're demanding that I be put in jail. What am I supposed to do? So the envoy goes back to the prince, and they send him out a girl for the night, an Egyptian songstress, probably also like a geisha, a prostitute. So comes out and they said, enjoy her for the night. Don't worry about anything. And the prince will have an audience with you in the morning to adjudicate here. Which he does. So the morning rolls around. The prince shows up with the Chakar and adjudicates, and he says to the Chakar, I have no jurisdiction over this man, and I'm not about to arrest an Egyptian here. So I'm going to send him on his way. If you want to arrest him, go right ahead once he's out of my waters. Not a very encouraging thought for Wenamun, but he loads up the cedars anyway onto his boat. And then apparently, I mean, there's a last paragraph here which seems kind of like a jump, like something's missing. And there are a lot of these gaps in the story. It's too bad we don't have the ending. It's too bad we don't have the full story because it's marvelous. It's one of the best pessimistic narratives of all time. So he leaves with the cedars on board this ship that is now run for him by a Syrian crew provided by the Prince of Byblos. And what happens is, of course, a shipwreck. He gets washed ashore on Cyprus now. So a shipwreck happens. He's lost all the cedar wood, and he's there with the remnants of the Syrian crew. And the natives there, the locals there, want to kill him. Cyprus is the island that was sacred to Venus, by the way. It had a huge copper mine on it, and they got a lot of, the word Cyprus is probably related to the word copper. Cyprian Venus. Venus comes from there, and that's the reason why Venus is associated with the metal of copper. In astrology and in alchemy, she's associated with copper because of Cyprus. So this is a kind of goddess worshipping island. And so there's a princess in charge there. And so when he gets there, they want to, the natives want to kill them, but he sees the princess coming out of the house and he says, hey, look, hold on a minute. I've heard from as far as Thebes that Cyprus is a place where justice is done, and justice needs to be done because your men want to kill me and my men. And I can tell you that bad things will happen to you if that happens because these men work for the Prince of Byblos, and the Prince of Byblos will then send 10 crews to reprise you for slaughtering their men. So you can't do this. And then the story ends with her saying, okay, well, sleep on it for tonight. And that's where it ends. Great story. And I wish we had the rest of it because it's one of Egypt's best and most finely crafted stories. If it is a story, and it might actually be a true story, we don't know. But that gives us a window into the Mediterranean Dark Age that's called the end of the Bronze Age, which is a state of total collapse that before the next generation, the second generation of the Greeks and the Hebrews and the Persians and the Indians and the Chinese get up and running.